By jury, followed by the People's Court, Inside Report, and Night Court.
She said the baby was dead, that he drowned in her swimming pool.
A 4-year-old child dies, and it just slips through the cracks.
God knows I've blamed myself enough already. I don't deserve this.
I saw her do it. I saw her hold his head under the water.
Isn't this payback day for Mom?
Objection!
Oh, my friend, that's part of the tragedy as I see it. Calvin was an adopted child, and 13 years after his death, his real mother, Sandy Cruz, discovered the fact of his death. Checking the coroner's report, she found evidence of bruises on little Calvin's neck and body. Now it's up to us. We must decide if he was a victim of accidental drowning or murder. This whole case is charged with excruciating emotion. Mother against mother. Mother against mother. Well, Sandy Cruz is going to be questioned shortly. I'm not sure I want to hear it.
Sandy, you had a baby in which you gave away 17 years ago. Is that right?
I got pregnant when I was 17. My mother said that I couldn't keep the baby, and then the baby disappeared, and we had to move out of town after that.
And what did your mother tell you on her deathbed?
She said that she had given him to Marcia Adams, who was our next-door neighbor at the time. She said she was sorry that I ought to get him back because Marcia would hurt him.
And how did Mrs. Adams react when you contacted her?
She said the baby was dead, that he drowned in her swimming pool.
But you didn't believe her?
She would hardly talk to me, so I decided to check out her story. She never took him to the emergency. There were bruises all over his body, and his little stomach was filled with chlorine bleach, and nobody did anything about it.
Your Honor, I refer you to this affidavit obtained last week by Mrs. Bell, the coroner's assistant at the time of the boy's death. She swears that the results of that autopsy pointed toward an intentional drowning, but that those results were ignored. Sandy, did Mrs. Bell say why the bruises and the chlorine bleach found in Calvin's stomach were ignored?
She said it just slipped through the cracks.
It just slipped through the cracks. A 4-year-old child dies, and it just slips through the cracks. Sandy, did Mrs. Adams try to hurt you while you lived next door to her as a child?
Objection, Your Honor. Irrelevant.
Your Honor, if you'll just allow the witness to answer, I believe I could establish a pattern.
The witness may answer the question.
She tried to drown me, too, when I was 14. I was babysitting her son, Greg. I was talking on the telephone, and accidentally I let the teapot on the stove burn. When she came home, she poured the sink full of water, and she put my head in. She said, maybe this will help you to remember to watch the stove.
Ladies and gentlemen, please note carefully the bruises found on little Calvin's neck by the coroner. Here and here. Nothing further, Your Honor.
Thank you, Counselor. Miss Cruz, there's a copy of the coroner's report on the death of your child. Can you please read the last paragraph to us?
The bruises and scratches found on the child's body were consistent with normal playground injuries. Stomach pump results contain tracks of household chlorine bleach rather than pool chlorine. But the victim's father explained he had put household chlorine in the pool water on the day of the death.
Continue, Miss Cruz. I believe there's only one more line.
Cause of death, accidental death by drowning.
Yeah. Now, Miss Cruz, I can't call the coroner himself as a witness because he's deceased. And his assistant, Mrs. Bell, is now 78 and confined to a wheelchair in a nursing home, is she not?
I don't see what difference that makes.
Well, does it make a difference to you that she's been diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease, Miss Cruz? That sometimes she can't remember her own daughter's name?
She was very lucid the day I spoke to her.
And all the more lucid, in your opinion, because she said exactly what you told her to say, didn't she? Didn't you provide her with these memories of this imaginary child who slipped through the cracks?
He was not imaginary. He was my child.
And your mother gave him away, and now you'll never see him again because he died in a horrible accident. Miss Cruz, you can't punish your mother for giving your baby away because she's gone now. Do you really think it's fair to punish Marcia Adams in her place? Mr. Adams, did you ever see your wife hurt Calvin?
Never. She didn't believe in corporal punishment. She said it only taught them to be violent.
Mm-hmm. Did you ever use household bleach to maintain your swimming pool?
All the time. I was always running out of pool supplies, and that stuff was so expensive. Sometimes I just grab a bottle from the kitchen sink and dump it in.
Thank you. No further questions, Your Honor.
Mr. Adams, isn't it a fact that when you divorced Mrs. Adams, you sought sole custody of Greg, claiming that he was in physical danger from Mrs. Adams?
People say lots of things during a divorce trial. That was my attorney's idea.
But you did suspect your wife of being a child abuser, didn't you?
No. Everything was all right until Calvin died in that accident. I mean, look, if I thought that she had done something so terrible, why would I be here testifying for her?
Guilt, Mr. Adams? Not because of what she did, but because of what you didn't do.
How much do you recall in detail from 13 years ago? You know, when facts or statistics are recorded in print like this, they're deemed reliable. But the facts may be as elusive as shadows when written only in memory. How can we, as jurors, judge the veracity of so-called facts dredged up from the distant past? Now, we've all heard two people describe an event in different ways only hours after it happened. Imagine the disparities if that same event had transpired 13 years ago. Do we remember things as they were or as we wanted them to be? The question's a pertinent one because we are about to hear the adoptive mother, Marcia Adams, give her side of the story.
Mrs. Adams, what happened that day at your backyard pool?
Jeffrey and I had a fence around the pool then. And the boys were playing with their boats in the baby pool outside the fence, but they wanted to put them in the big pool. And I told them no. But Greg, who was 8 at the time, figured out a way to climb over the fence by piling up the lawn chairs.
And when did you realize Calvin was drowning?
Gregory came running into the kitchen to tell me. He said Calvin had fallen into the deep end, and I panicked because Calvin couldn't swim. And I ran out to the pool, but it was too late. He'd already drowned. God knows I blame myself enough already. I don't deserve this.
No further questions.
Mrs. Adams, it looks to me like those bruises in the photographs were pretty deep. As if someone had held Calvin underwater by the neck. Do you know how they got there?
I don't know. The boys roughhoused a lot.
Yesterday we heard the medical expert testify that the hand that made those bruises was a hand with a span of 6 1/4 inches wide, and that the average 8-year-old hand span is less than 5 inches wide. Wasn't it your hand that made those bruises, Mrs. Adams?
No.
In fact, wasn't it your hand that made all the other bruises and all the scratches found on Calvin's body?
Oh, of course not. The report says he got those bruises on the playground.
Yes, I imagine that you've memorized that report word for word. Why didn't you call an ambulance? Why didn't you take him to the emergency room, Mrs. Adams?
It was too late. When I pulled him out, I tried to clear his lungs, but he was already gone.
Greg, what was it like for you and your stepbrother living with your mother, Marcia Adams?
Well, Calvin got the worst of it because he was a free spirit. Mom had all sorts of inventive punishments for us. One time when Calvin had thrown Play-Doh all over the living room, she locked him in a closet in the attic. It was the middle of the summer. It was boiling hot. And by the time she let him out, he was so dehydrated he was sick.
Now, you told me at the recess that you actually witnessed Calvin's drowning. Can you tell us about that?
Well, Mom was mad at Calvin, and she started hitting him for swearing. I went to my room because I saw her get out the bleach. That's what she always did to us when we talked back to her or said bad words. She put bleach in our mouths.
And what happened next, Greg?
When I got to my room, I looked out the window, and I saw her do it. I saw her hold his head under the water. Calvin's legs were kicking and his arms were waving. And then finally, he just went limp. She pulled his head out of the water, put it in her lap, stroked his hair, and started crying.
Why didn't you tell anybody this story before?
I was scared. I just wanted to pretend it never happened.
Nothing further.
Mr. Adams, were you put under a psychiatrist's care for the 6 months following your brother's death?
Yes, my mother arranged it.
And in fact, that doctor stated in previous testimony that you were suffering from a guilt complex. Is that right?
Yeah, like he said, I felt guilty because I thought I should have saved Calvin, but he didn't know I meant save him from Mom.
Do you love your mother?
No, I don't.
Do you hate your mother?
I don't know.
Aren't you angry with her because she just booted you out of her house? Weren't you just fired from your 5th job in 6 months? Isn't this payback day for Mom?
Objection!
I withdraw. No further questions of this devoted son. However, I would like to recall Marcia Adams to answer these accusations.
I never wanted to talk about this, but Gregory leaves me no choice. When I said that Calvin got those bruises roughhousing, that was only partly true.
How did he get those bruises, Mrs. Adams?
Greg was insanely jealous. He was always beating Calvin. One time I found him hitting him with a baseball bat. And the bruises on Calvin's neck, those were because Greg was constantly putting him in a Vulcan death grip. I almost called Sandy Cruz and gave Calvin back to her. And I wished to God I had.
Why do you say that?
Because Calvin would be alive today. Greg was always sneaking around the pool and trying to get him to jump into the deep end when he knew he couldn't swim, and that's how Calvin died. Greg pushed him into the pool and he drowned. And I never really faced it until today. That my own son could do something so awful.
No further questions.
Mrs. Adams, how is it that you never saw fit to tell anyone that your son was a homicidal maniac until now?
I never said he was homicidal.
You just said that he orchestrated his own brother's death. Now, if he was that sick, don't you think he should have had long-term therapy?
We did take him to a psychiatrist.
Of course, for your own cover-up.
Objection, Your Honor, badgering the witness.
Sustained.
I'm through with this witness, Your Honor. We have an eyewitness, Greg Adams. He stood and watched his mother drown his 4-year-old helpless brother in horror. What he told us fits the fact that the new bruises found on the victim's neck match the size of an adult hand. Greg Adams could not have inflicted these wounds. Marcia Adams could have, and did. We heard that Marcia Adams has a history of a child abuser. She abused her son, Greg. She abused Sandy Cruz. She abused and killed Calvin Adams. Now, despite all this psychological mumbo-jumbo about guilt complexes and mother hatred, one fact remains. No other explanation makes sense. Marcia Adams murdered her adopted son, Calvin, with her bare hands.
13 years ago, the coroner looked at the facts of Calvin Adams' death. All the experts agreed, death by accidental drowning. It was a tragedy. Now, 13 years later, prosecution asks us to believe that Marcia Adams is a cold-blooded child killer. And what changed? Not the facts. No new evidence was found. Oh, Greg Adams, a dissolute drifter who can't hold down a job and has a history of psychiatric problems, has certainly created a horror story, but, you know, we can't tell what he saw. I don't think he knows. So why? Why this trial? What changed? The world changed. That's what. We're all aware of child abuse now. We see it in every corner, and we recognize it for the horrific crime it is. But Marcia Adams did not commit any crime. She's on trial because a sympathetic, if hysterical woman is trying to get revenge on her own dead mother for giving away her baby. And for that, Marcia Adams cannot be punished.
Of course we grieve for their loss, but we can't lose sight of our responsibility. Now, did the bruises on Calvin's neck result from foul play or simply a tragic boy's game? Personally, I'm intrigued, and that's the wrong word. I'm troubled by the distance between those marks on his neck. You too? All right, then tell me, what manner of person do you see in the face of Marcia Adams?
The jury's reached a verdict. Bailiff? Will the defendant please rise? The jury finds the defendant, Marcia Adams, guilty as charged. You are hereby sentenced to 25 years to life in a state penitentiary. This court is adjourned.
There is so much child abuse with us today. 13 years ago, when Calvin Adams died, the battered child syndrome was not often recognized. But we concluded today that it led to his death. In the last 13 years, I wonder how many Calvins have gone to their deaths, silently and in terror. I know what you're thinking. We all have a responsibility. We must all take care that neither a victimized child nor a falsely accused parent suffers. But it's a very complex issue, as the next one will be on trial by jury. I hope you'll join me again and again.
Charles jumped on him and tried to get him to drop this gun.
All I can remember thinking was that I'd killed a man.
Do you think that after you ran away, someone came in, picked up that gun, killed Artie, and then removed the fingerprints from the gun?
Dr. Farley, I submit to you that you argued with and shot Arnie Sachs.
Tonight at 8, KCOP presents a world television premiere. Mia Farrow and Diane Wiest star in Woody Allen's classic comedy, Radio Days. Coming up from coast to coast, it's everybody's favorite forum for justice, the People's Court, next.